John and Claire. I love my partner Claire, and yesterday I was 100% sure that she loves me just as much. Today, I'm not so sure anymore. What made me think that? What caused doubts? Nothing she said or did, just a strange feeling. Claire and I travel frequently for work. She works in the sales department for a successful advertising agency, and I work as a service engineer in a packaging plant producing packaging for the food industry. She's leaving for 2 or 3 days, just like me. Our trips rarely coincide, so we only see each other on weekends. That is why we decided to save money in order to create a comfortable financial situation by the age of 30, change jobs to one that will allow us to be at home more, and possibly start a family. We both have good salaries, so everything is going according to plan, and we have a year left to reach our goal. Yesterday, I told Claire that I would pick her up from the airport in the evening after her trip to Denver. She was there for 3 days and 2 nights. She got off the plane with her boss. They often travel together. I knew this, and she said that this time they were flying together. It wasn't a surprise, nor was her kiss and hug, which was as gentle as always. When we got home, we did what we always do when one of us returns from a trip we made love. Yesterday was no exception. There was nothing to indicate that anything was wrong. However, sitting in my office today, I remembered that malicious look on her boss's face that irritated me. It was as if he was saying, "I know something you don't know," or "I had sex with your partner." That's why I went from confidence to doubt. It's an unpleasant feeling. We returned home at the same time, cooked dinner together, and spent a pleasant evening relaxing and talking. I didn't voice my concerns. I needed to think things through first. Since it was Friday, we had the whole weekend to spend together. On Saturdays, I usually play golf with my friends, and she goes shopping with her friends. In the evening, we meet with friends. After a Sunday walk in the fresh air and a quiet afternoon, I decided to gently broach the subject. I didn't want to ask her directly. She might be offended if she had nothing to hide. And if it had happened, most likely, she would have said that nothing happened. I won't go through her phone or laptop. I won't eavesdrop on conversations or hire a private detective. If this was a one-time mistake, I will forgive you. But I thought through everything about what I would do if this is not so. After dinner, I turned to Claire. "Hey, can I talk to you about something?" "Did something happen?" she asked. Her face expressed nothing. "No, as far as I know," I replied. "You see, Claire, we're on the road a lot. We're away from home so often that I'm starting to get a little worried. We work, eat, sleep, and hardly have time to have fun. When I'm away from you, I get lonely. Do you feel the same?" "Yes, John, I feel it. When I'm away, I see a lot of single men and women who solve their problem of loneliness through extramarital affairs. They say it makes time away from home more exciting. They also claim that they don't love their spouses any less because of this, but in my opinion, that can't be true. It is impossible to have an intimate relationship on the side without showing disrespect to your partner. This is definitely not love." "Do you suspect that I deal with loneliness in this way, John?" she asked, and I noticed how tears began to appear in her eyes. "No, I don't suspect it. I trust you. So that you don't doubt, I'll say that I don't do anything like that either. However, I had an idea that would help calm me down and maybe add a little excitement and novelty to us." "Okay, go ahead. Tell me what you came up with," she laughed. I pulled a dice out of my pocket. I found it recently in my office, thinking about this problem. Showing it to Claire, I said, "The next time one of us goes on a business trip, I suggest that the one staying at home roll this dice after his partner leaves. If a 6 or any other pre-selected value is rolled, the one who stayed at home takes a ticket to the same city and arranges a surprise by visiting his partner at the hotel. I would love a surprise visit from you, and I hope you feel the same. What do you say?" I watched her reaction carefully, trying to see if she seemed disappointed. She didn't express any emotion, but thought for a while before answering. "Interesting idea, John, but do you really think it's a good idea to fly when you don't need to, instead of relaxing at home and gathering strength for work?" "I agree, Claire, but remember, the die has 6 sides, and the chance of getting the chosen number is 1 in 6. You can roll the die for months before the right number comes up, or it may fall out the first time. This is what makes everything interesting. We discussed this idea for a long time, with Claire expressing some doubts. At the end, I said, if you're tired, you can just not throw the dice. If you have some free time and are up for an adventure, just take a trip and surprise me. Rolling the die is optional. It's completely your choice. I still won't know. However, I'm going to roll the dice every time you go away for the night and leave the decision to chance. Our busy schedule continued for several weeks, and neither of us surprised the other with a visit. I didn't throw the dice because I was very busy at work. I was just waiting for the right time to give her a surprise visit. One evening, I was at a hotel bar in Palm Beach with 2 colleagues. The hotel was hosting the annual meeting of the Personal Care Products Association. My friends, Mark and Steve, started a group of 2 women, Eva and Nancy, both married with children. I didn't like it at all because Mark and Steve were also married. They persistently persuaded me to find a companion and go to the club with them. I refused, saying, "Go ahead, I'll go back to the room, read a little, and go to bed." Then a very beautiful woman came through the door. Something about her made me look twice at her. She moved like Claire, but it couldn't be her, right? I didn't recognize the dress she was wearing. She had long blonde hair, and Claire was a brunette. She wore glasses. Claire used contact lenses. The woman walked to the far end of the bar and found a seat, tossing her hair over her right shoulder so it cascaded down the front of her dress. This gesture gave her away. I realized that Claire had come to visit me. Since I was at the other end of the bar, I walked up to the bartender and said, "See that blonde at the far end?" He nodded. "I know for sure that her favorite cocktail is the White Lady. Please prepare it and give it to her from John. Credit it to my account." "With pleasure, sir," he replied. I drank my beer and watched Claire. When the cocktail arrived and the bartender pointed at me, she turned to me and raised her glass in greeting. "I've changed my mind," I told my colleagues, standing up. I headed towards Claire. "You tried so hard to deceive me, didn't you?" I said, smiling. "I dyed my hair, bought a new dress, put on glasses. Very clever." "Well, I'm surprised that you recognized me so quickly." "How?" "I was sure when you tossed your hair over your right shoulder." "That's your signature gesture," I replied, laughing. "Claire, can you do me a favor?" "Of course. What do you want?" "Come back with me to our table. Pretend we're strangers. They know I'm in a relationship, but they don't know your name, so you can use your real name." "Of course, but why?" she asked curiously. "My 2 friends at the table are married, but not to the women they are sitting with. Those women have husbands and children at home, but they are looking for fun on the side. Can you play the role and scare them a little by hinting at the possible consequences? Of course, it will be fun. Let's go to them." We returned to the table and I introduced her to my colleagues, ordered another round of drinks. We chatted casually for a while until Mark and Steve apparently decided it was time to head out to the club as they had planned. Eve turned to Claire. "Will you and John come with us?" "I'm not sure. I think I'll go to bed early," Claire replied, then continued. "You and Nancy are planning to go to the club with Mark and Steve, I understand, but what will you do then?" "I think we know Mark and Steve well enough to say that if the evening goes as we expect, we'll have breakfast with them, if you know what I mean." "Of course," Claire replied, smiling discreetly. "But what will you say if you return home and your husbands ask why you danced with strange men in a nightclub, or why you went into a stranger's hotel room late at night?" "I don't understand," Nancy replied. "They won't know." "A neighbor or friend might have seen you and told your husbands," Claire said. "I will say that nothing happened," Nancy answered hastily. "It was just work colleagues and a late-night cocktail. He will believe me." "Where was the conference held last year?" asked Claire. "In Naples," they answered simultaneously. "Suppose your husband saw something similar in Naples last year. He trusts you and doesn't ask, but decides to check by hiring someone to find out what you've been up to here in Palm Beach. Are you ready to take risks with such possible consequences? There is no risk, we are careful. We've never seen any of our husband's friends, Eva answered, but her facial expression betrayed uncertainty and slight panic. I see, Claire said. How do you know that I am not hired by one of your husbands? What? You're kidding, they exclaimed in unison. There was clear panic on their faces, and Nancy turned pale. No, I'm not joking. But relax. If your husband really hired me, I would follow you into the club, observe you, and then provide evidence, so you're safe from me. But this shows that you are not as smart and careful as you think. Eve looked at Nancy and said that she needed to go to the toilet. If one woman goes to the toilet, she rarely goes alone, so Nancy follows her. They were gone for quite some time, and when they returned, it was obvious that they had been crying. Eve walked up to the table, handed Steve a $50 bill, and said, "We flirted with you and gave the impression that we would spend the night with you. You treated us to drinks, and we misled you. Please accept this money to cover the cost of the drinks you bought us. We go to bed alone. Good night, we're sorry, but Claire opened our eyes." They left the bar without looking back. The atmosphere at the table cooled noticeably. Mark looked at Claire angrily and asked, "Why did you need to interfere? Couldn't they have been allowed to make their own decisions?" "Of course," Claire answered calmly. "I'm not going to say anything when they get back. They have the right to make their own decisions, but it is worth remembering the risks and possible consequences." The women never returned, and Mark and Steve finished their beer in silence. Then Claire took my hand, pulled me up from the chair, and said, "Come on, John, let's go back to your room and have some fun." "You hypocritical bitch," Steve roared. "You drove our girls away with your moralizing, and now you're planning to spend the night with John? That's crap." "Sorry, Steve," I said, smiling, "but this amazing and beautiful woman is mine. We are together forever." We left holding hands, heading towards my room. The night turned out to be wonderful. Sometimes surprises can be very pleasant. 3 months later, I was sitting on a plane heading to Chicago. I remembered Claire's visit to Palm Beach and that funny incident in the bar. After this incident, I stopped doubting her loyalty and never threw the dice again. Doubts disappeared, giving way to confidence. It was a good feeling. I was looking forward to tonight, planning to surprise her. This time I decided to create a surprise without any dice rolls. This morning when I arrived at work, my boss told me he had booked me a ticket to Chicago with a return flight later that evening. There was a problem at a local factory, and he was confident that I could solve it as soon as possible. When I heard that my partner was in Chicago, I told him about our dice game. The boss agreed to change my return flight to the first flight the next morning so I could stay in the city. The job took a little longer than I expected. I would still have missed my evening flight if I had stayed on the same route. I took a taxi and headed to the hotel where Claire was staying. It turned out to be the same hotel that my company often uses. When I entered the lobby, the girl at the front desk recognized me and greeted me. "It's good to see you, Mr. Cotter. I didn't know you were going to stay with us tonight." "And I didn't know it myself," I answered. "The company sent me on an urgent call, and when I learned that my beloved was here, I decided to surprise her." "This is wonderful, Mr. Cotter. She's in the room. Let me check." "Yes, room 627. She went up there less than half an hour ago alone, if that's what you're interested in," she added with a smile. "I'll make a key card for you right now." She handed me the card and added, "I see you are light, only with a briefcase. Do you need a personal care kit, toothbrush, shaving kit?" "That would be wonderful. I didn't have time to go home and pack my things." With a small package of necessary things, I went up to her room. I opened the door with my key, knocked on the closet door to alert her, and said, "Claire, it's me," walking inside. Her clothes were on the bed, her suitcase was open on the floor, but Claire herself was not there. I knocked on the bathroom door and opened it, but she wasn't there either. Confused, I returned to the room and noticed an open door leading to the next room. From there, they could hear the Wookiees. A shiver ran through me. My first impulse was to rush into the next room, but something stopped me. I just didn't want to see her in bed with another man. They started talking, and I heard everything very clearly. I walked up to the half-open door, took out my iPhone, and turned on the recording. That was amazing, Claire. Yes, Peter, it was wonderful. But understand, you are not a better lover than John. You are his replacement, because you are here and he is not. You help me cope with my time away from home, but don't think for a minute that I prefer you to him. I understand this perfectly. I love my wife and also prefer to stay at home. However, I really enjoy our moments together when we travel. What our spouses don't know doesn't hurt them. Let it stay that way, Peter. Remember what you promised me a couple of months ago? Certainly. When you turn 30, you'll get a job at headquarters with little or no travel. That's right. As I told you, we have been approved as potential adoptive parents, and we expect to be in line for a boy or girl soon. Then we will become a full-fledged family, and no one except John will share my bed. I understand. I should enjoy these last 6 months and be grateful for them. I was disappointed when you said you wanted to stop after the first time, and then John suggested this dice game. Well, I really was going to stop then, but you suggested the idea of connecting rooms, never going into them together, and not showing yourself as lovers outside the rooms. I felt safe knowing we wouldn't be found out. But as I said, after we have a family, I will never cheat again. I will remain faithful to John forever. At this point, I have heard enough. I carefully closed the door on my side and locked it. I sat down on the bed and cried. The shock of finding Claire in bed with her boss was devastating. She told him she loved me, not him, that she likes being with me more than with him. But how can I accept this? For a long time, I just sat there, contemplating my next steps. Gradually, the thought became stronger in my mind. My time with her as a partner was over. I took a shower and set the alarm on my phone for 5 in the morning. My flight was leaving at 7:15, and I needed to be at the airport around 6. Lying alone in the bed I had hoped to be in with Claire was depressing. I didn't sleep a wink all night. Since only one of the doors between the rooms was closed, I heard them making love again. This made me cry even more. When the alarm rang, I got ready to leave. Peter was snoring and Claire was sleeping. I wrote a small note on hotel stationery and left it on her laptop so she wouldn't miss it. The note read, "Claire, it pains me greatly to learn about your relationship with Peter. You should stay in Chicago until Friday, do your work, and don't come home today. Please be respectful, stay there, and give me time to move. If you do that, I promise to see you at home on Saturday at noon to talk. Please ask Peter to come too. I need to talk to both of you. After this, we can talk in private. John. P.S. I won't turn on my phone. Don't try to call or write. J." As a final gesture, I took off my ring and placed it on top of the note. If I had been kinder, I would have opened the connecting door before leaving. But I didn't do it. I wanted her to feel the embarrassment of asking the front desk for help. I wonder what excuse she'll come up with. She did as I asked. No calls, no messages. However, when I arrived at the office and turned on the computer, I found an email from her. "Dear John, I'm so sorry for what I did to Peter, and I'm so disappointed in myself for my stupidity. This may be too much, but I still have to try to hope that you can forgive me. I will do as you ask and expect you at noon on Saturday. Why you want Peter there is beyond me. He is also depressed and realizes that he has caused pain that is difficult to undo. He will be there. Yours, Claire." I entered our house on Saturday afternoon. The door was unlocked, and I found Claire and Peter in the kitchen. They looked like they hadn't slept in days. Claire especially looked exhausted and drained. They both stood up, waiting, as it seemed to me, for some signal from me on how to continue. Claire moved towards me to hug me, but I stopped her. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Please sit down. I want to play a short audio recording before we start talking," I said. I opened my laptop and turned on the recording of their conversation, which I recorded on my phone. Both spoke as soon as the recording ended. I raised my hand to stop them. This short recording of your conversation, which I accidentally overheard when I came to Claire's room, tells me a lot. First, she tells me, Peter, that you love your wife. Secondly, she tells me that Claire loves me. But it also shows that sex between you is just fun, not love. From this, I conclude that you two were planning to continue your affair for another 6 months, believing that your partners would never find out and therefore would not be hurt by it. This attitude shows deep insincerity and humiliation towards their spouses. I took a sip of the coffee Claire poured for me before continuing. I asked you to come, Peter, so that you could hear yourself and understand the disrespect you showed your wife. I forgive you and Claire, not for your sake, but for my own. I'm not going to waste my mental energy on hatred and revenge. However, I can't continue to be with Claire. I don't trust her anymore. I hate what you did, but I don't hate you. Peter, I'm telling you this. Go home, love your wife. I won't say anything, provided that you never do anything like that again, and that you respect and appreciate her. In addition, I expect Claire to agree to a division of our property without conflict. We have one life, let's not waste it fighting for something that can no longer be saved. If Claire agrees to this, I won't have to use this audio recording, and you'll be safe, Peter. Claire burst into tears. Please, John, if you say you forgive me, can't we work something out and stay together? I handed in my resignation to Peter. I will no longer travel with him. After Peter leaves, we'll talk. I answered her. Then I turned to Peter. You should not accept her resignation letter. If Claire leaves your company at the same time we break up, your wife will put two and two together. No, wait a little before you let her go. Moreover, you will write her a bonus. You are the main culprit, not the only one, but the main one, and therefore you must pay compensation. Peter expressed regret for his role in destroying what we had and left. When we were alone, Claire tried to persuade me again. She cried and begged. Claire, listen to me for a minute. I forgive, but I can't forget. I can't live my life wondering what you've been up to lately or who you might meet when you're alone. I can't live like this. I need absolute trust in my partner, and you destroyed that trust. Even if you give me your absolute assurances, it won't change anything. You already broke your promise to stay true to only me once. Why should I trust you now? Isn't there anything that can be done? Claire sobbed. No, sorry. Let me explain. When Julius Caesar disobeyed the Senate's orders to resign as military leader in 49 BC and marched his legions against Rome, he is said to have crossed the Rubicon River and said, "The gamble has been cast, the die is cast." This phrase means that he has passed the point of no return. In your case, Claire, you have crossed a river called loyalty, and there is no turning back. I'm sorry, Claire, I'm grieving, but we need to separate. I thought Claire had given up fighting for our partnership, but no, she made one last desperate attempt. Please, John, have mercy on me. You know that if we break up, the adoption we've been working towards for so long will fall through. We've finally been approved as a match, and you know I'll be a good mother. If we break up, I won't have a second chance. You know that I will not be approved as a mother. This is my only chance to become a mother. She was crying. You should have thought about that before you started sleeping with Peter, was my laconic and sad answer. With these words, I hugged her, leaving a grief-stricken woman behind me. Tim. I was at the mall with my best friend Mary. We had already been running from one store to another for 3 hours straight. I suggested sitting down in a cafe to rest my legs, drink coffee, and, as girls usually do, chat. We finished our brownies, took our first sips of lattes, and Mary looked at me. Glad to see you and Tim again. You are so perfect for each other that none of your friends understand why you moved out a while ago. What's happened? Did he cheat on you? You both remain silent, not saying a word. He keeps his mouth shut, and you are just as much of a secret. You can tell me, I won't tell anyone. Do you promise not to tell anyone, even Frank? I asked. Of course I won't tell anyone, she assured with a conspiratorial smile. I started my story. In May, I was in St. Louis for a company seminar. It was held at the Hilton on the baseball diamond. All sales managers from all over the country gathered to discuss the program for the next year. It was only a 2-day event, one night away from Tim. There was another meeting in the same hotel, and one of the participants was an old friend of mine from college. Well, he wasn't just a friend. I dated him for several months until we broke up when he graduated a year before me. We both decided that we were good friends, but it was unlikely that our love would last long. We parted ways as friends, no hard feelings. Mary interrupted me. Were you lovers? Yes, they were, I confirmed. He was a good and attentive lover. The problem was that we had different interests. He loved hang gliding, rock climbing, and other extreme sports. I did not share his hobbies and did not want to participate in them, and he, in turn, was not interested in mine. Nevertheless, when I met him in the hall, I was glad. We both wanted to refresh old memories, so we had dinner together. It was nice. I drank too much wine, and he pushed all the right buttons. Long story short, I ended up in his bed. The sex was good and satisfying. As I already said, he is a good lover, no better than Tim, but no worse. However, when I woke up the next morning, guilt hit me like a sledgehammer. When he suggested morning sex, I refused, got dressed, and left his room. Needless to say, I spent the rest of the day with a terrible feeling of guilt and even felt sick. "So what's wrong with that?" said Mary. "What Tim doesn't know won't hurt him." Yes, I tried to convince myself of this too, but the pain, shame, and feeling that I had betrayed Tim were so strong that I decided, never again, it's not worth it. Over the next couple of weeks, I thought that everything would gradually be forgotten, and this experience became a lesson for me that I will never forget. I was sure that for the rest of my life, I would walk along the narrow path of fidelity without taking steps to the side. That's exactly what I thought then. But then everything went wrong. "Oh, what happened?" asked Mary. One day, George Wilson, manager of the after-sales support team, came to my office. He sat down and said he was in St. Louis for work a couple of weeks ago. He was staying at the Hilton and saw me with a man he knew was not my husband. His curiosity turned out to be too strong, and besides, his number was next to my friend's number. He saw us enter the room and saw me leave early in the morning. No wonder he put two and two together. "Oh my God, what a failure!" Mary exclaimed. "Yes, terrible. I thought it was all over, but here it is." I asked him what he was going to do with this information. "Mary, you can guess what he wanted for his silence, right?" "Of course," she replied. "He wanted to sleep with you, am I right?" He didn't say it outright, but he hinted at going out for a long lunch together once a month to spend quality time together, as he put it. I couldn't agree, so I told him no. He just smiled, told me to think about it for a week, and left. "Well done, and then you went to Tim's house and confessed everything, right? He probably asked you to leave for a while to think things over. And then he forgave you and wanted you back, right?" she asked. "Not really," I replied. "He gave me a week to think about it. But I didn't do what you suggest. I didn't confess to Tim. He would be furious. I needed to handle this situation smartly. You see, I love him so much that it was important to me that he not only forgives me, but wants to be with me more than with anyone else. I took a risk, and the risk paid off." "Now you really intrigue me. What did you do?" Mary asked, her eyebrows arched with genuine curiosity. "The next day, I took the day off. I found a small, fully furnished apartment and rented it for 3 months. I withdrew $5,000 from our joint account to pay the bail and have some money to live on. By the way, this amount was not even half of what we had in our account. Then I opened a new account in my name at another bank. I moved my personal belongings to the new apartment, returned home, and cooked dinner for Tim. After dinner, I told him we needed to talk. We sat in the living room with cups of coffee. I told him that I was leaving him. Naturally, he wanted to know why, but I said it would be better for both of us. I explained that I loved him, that I had no one else, but I had to move on. I said that I only took my personal belongings and $5,000 from our joint account. We can discuss practical details later. I gave him my credit card, cut it in half, told him that I now had a new phone number, and offered to communicate by email. He was in shock, almost paralyzed. I took my bag and left the house before he could react. It was brutal, Mary said. Yes, I know, but that was part of my plan. The next day, when I arrived at the office, I found a long letter from Tim in my email inbox. He was very offended. I answered politely, not answering all of his questions except one. I assured him that he had done nothing wrong and that I still loved him. I also added that I was not going to file for divorce, at least not yet, and asked for time to be alone for a few weeks. "What about George Wilson and his threats?" asked Mary. Of course, he returned to my office a week later, as promised. I told him no again and explained that I could not betray my husband again. I added that I confessed to Tim that I was cheating on him, and he kicked me out of the house. Now I live alone in a small apartment, and I hope that someday he will be able to forgive me. George didn't know what to say, but he apologized before leaving. "Poor thing," Mary said sympathetically. "How did you cope the next few days? Tim must have been beside himself." Yes, he was. He wrote me letters every day, first angry, then sad, then full of regret, every emotion you can imagine. I answered him every evening, avoiding comforting words and direct answers to his questions. However, I described how I spent the day, who I met, what I did, the type of information that a wife usually tells her husband over dinner after a day of work. I think my friendly and attentive answers calmed him down a little, and after a few days he began to write in the same spirit. He stopped complaining and began sharing the events of his days. These letters began to resemble our family dinners. "But what did all this lead to? What were you trying to achieve with this?" asked Mary. "I'll get to that. First, I'll tell you what happened next. Every day I logged into our joint bank account. Tim didn't change his password. I just watched what transactions were happening, but did not withdraw money. In the early days, these were normal transactions, but after a week, what I expected happened. He withdrew $3,000 in cash. Why were you waiting for this? Why did you need him to withdraw $3,000? Mary was surprised. If the situation had been reversed, I would have checked to see if he had another woman. I assumed he hired a private investigator to follow me. The $3,000 could have been an advance payment to the detective. I wanted him to follow me to prove that I had no one. I never went anywhere with one person, only in groups. She was never alone with a man or woman without him thinking about possible romances. I had no guests in the apartment. I was absolutely clean. He should have received a report completely free of suspicion. That was my goal. "You are a cunning girl, simply devilishly inventive. What happened next?" Mary asked with a smile. "Nothing special. The weeks passed as usual. We exchanged letters every day. I knew that I was being monitored, so I continued to be only in groups. However, I needed the detective Tim hired to access my phone records. I noticed a new girl in our office who I thought was part of the surveillance team, and left my phone on the table as I left for the meeting. When I returned, it was not exactly in the place where I left it. Most likely, spyware was loaded into it. This is exactly what I wanted now. I could send messages that I knew the detective would read. All plans for going to the cinema, concerts, meeting friends, or walking in the park on Sunday could reach Tim. I waited for him to try to accidentally meet me. I was sure that sooner or later this would happen. Mary sat. Her coffee had already cooled. She looked at me impatiently. "He did it? Continue, please. Do you remember Friday 3 weeks ago when we met after work at that bar downtown?" "Yes, I remember." "Oh, now it's clear. When he approached you and asked you to dance, was this the meeting you were waiting for?" she asked. "Yes, that's right. It took him 5 weeks. By that time, he was sure that I had no one. He came to that bar because he knew I was there. He sat in a dark corner of the bar, watching as I turned down several guys who tried to ask me to dance. So when he came up to me and asked me to dance with the most beautiful woman in the bar, I said, 'Yes, I'd love to.'" "That's so sweet," she said with a smile. And you made up. I'm so glad. Not really. He wanted to talk and ask why I left. I said we need to find a more private place. We went into the hotel lobby nearby and found a quiet corner. He told me that he missed me, that he loved me and wanted me back. Then I started telling why I left, about his mistake in St. Louis, about how I realized that I couldn't live with him under the same roof, knowing what I did, how I betrayed his trust. At the end, I said, now you know why I had to leave. You can't have a wife like me. How did he react to this? She asked. He was silent for a while. Of course he was upset. What did you expect? After a while, he looked at me and asked, can you answer 3 questions honestly? Of course, I replied. The first question was, do you love or have strong feelings for this college friend of yours? No, I don't, I told him. I love only you, and I don't feel such feelings for anyone else. Second question. If you met him again in a similar situation, would you end up in bed with him again? No, of course not. If I met him again, I would be polite and treat him only as a friend. I would do anything not to be alone with him. Not because I doubt my ability to resist temptation, it won't happen, but because I want to avoid any misunderstandings. The last question was, if this all leads to divorce and you become a free woman, will you look for him to rekindle the relationship? No, absolutely not, I told him. And then he forgave you and everything became fine? Mary asked with a wide smile. Not really. He wanted me to come home, saying we could get through this. He missed me, and yes, he said he was sure he could forgive me. But I told him that forgiveness on his part is not the main thing. The problem is that I can forgive myself. I couldn't go home if I didn't feel relaxed, wanted, and loved, not just forgiven. This would have been impossible if he constantly interrogated me about where I was and with whom. I didn't want this accident to come up in any of our future arguments. In turn, I gave him my word that I would never find myself in a similar situation again, that I would never lie, and that I would always inform him of what I was doing. This pain and shame taught me a very hard lesson. Then I told him he needed to think about it for a week. No calls, no emails, or other communication for the entire week. If next Friday he still wants to be with me, let him pick me up at my apartment after work. I gave him my address, and you know, he did it. He was waiting for me at the entrance when I returned home from work. And yes, no need to ask, my suitcases were ready. Mary sat in her chair, looked at me with admiration and asked, how did you come up with such a plan? Have you forgotten that I am the daughter of a general? Throughout my childhood, he told us kids about military strategies over dinner. My father always said, the best defense is an attack. And it worked. Mandy, Jane, and Jack. Sitting on a park bench, I watched my little daughter run around chasing soap bubbles. A bitter smile played on my face. I loved this little charmer, but at the same time I hated her. 2 years have passed since my divorce and 2.5 since her birth. I carried this pregnancy through with joy, fully believing that this bud of love growing in my womb was the result of a passionate night with my husband, Frank. In the delivery room, after several hours of labor and delivery, hearing the loud cry of the newborn, I breathed a sigh of relief, another healthy baby, as I had hoped. Before cutting the umbilical cord, the midwife placed the baby on my chest and said with a sincere smile that I had given birth to a beautiful girl. I looked at her lovingly, but then got the shock of my life when I saw a child with black hair, darker skin than expected, and obvious negroid features. I lost consciousness. You see, Frank and I are both white, and I've never slept with a black man. Or at least that's what I thought. I pushed these thoughts away and looked at her again. Will I ever be able to tell her who her father is? Most likely not. Just like the last few Saturday mornings, I saw a sweet and handsome black man come hand in hand with the little boy Jane loved to play with. The boy, I would say, is about 3 years old. He pulled his father towards the playground, eager to join the game with Jane. Entering the site, he let go of his father's hand and ran to my daughter. Together, they began to chase the soap bubbles that she released from her bubble dispenser. Unlike his usual behavior, when he sat on the bench on the other side of the court, this time he walked towards me. Since our children play so well together, he said, maybe we can talk a little too. He extended his hand and added, I'm Jacob. To my friends, I'm Jack. Can I sit next to you? Of course, please sit down, I replied. My name is Mandy. We spent a very pleasant Saturday morning watching our children play and talking about everything and nothing. The bench we sat on became our meeting place. Every Saturday morning, while our children played, we discussed daily routines, small worries, and sometimes more serious problems. Over time, Jack began to tell me his life story. He told how he lost his wife in a car accident and how he copes with being a single parent to a young son. I also learned that he is a lawyer, spends a lot of time in the office, and has hired a live-in nanny for George, his son. On weekends, he tried to spend time with the child, and it was obvious that he was a wonderful father. I mostly listened, talking little about my problems. So one day, he turned to me and said, Mandy, I've told you a lot about myself and my situation. You, on the contrary, told almost nothing about yourself. I guess that you are divorced and that you are not very happy with your current life. Sometimes I see sadness in your smile when you look at your daughter. Will you tell me a little about your problems? I suspect they are related to her and her father, right? I'm sorry if you feel like I'm keeping my distance from you. You're right, and I think telling someone about this would be a good idea before I go crazy. But not here and not now. I need to get my head together, and this needs to be a child-free place. I might cry a little, I replied. Okay, said Jack. Here's what we can do. One evening next week, you can bring your daughter to my house and George's nanny will take care of them both. And I'll take you to a nice restaurant for dinner. It's quiet, there are booths separated from each other, so we'll be private and you can cry without attracting attention. If you agree, you will tell as much as you want, and I promise to listen to you with an open heart. Thank you, that's very kind of you. Decide for yourself when it's convenient. I'm always free after work. And you know, it sounds pathetic, but I should have pulled myself together a long time ago and started going out into the world, but I never did. I don't go anywhere at all. Great, he said with a smile. I'll call you on Monday morning when I look at my schedule and choose a suitable day. Even if you decide to tell a little, I will at least get you to leave the house for at least one evening. Jack called as promised on Monday, and we agreed to meet on Wednesday. That day, after work, I told Jane that we were going to visit George. She was delighted and couldn't wait to get out of the house. Standing in front of Jack and Jane's house, I was a little nervous. It wasn't a date in the traditional sense, but it had been so long since I'd had dinner with a man. I dressed modestly but tastefully. When I looked at myself in the mirror before going out, I saw a woman I hadn't seen in a long time, and I said to myself, Mandy, you look good. If you want, you can find yourself a man. But alas, I was not ready yet. Sighing, I pressed the doorbell. Jack opened the door and, after a short pause, exclaimed, Wow, you look absolutely amazing today. You are a beautiful woman. I'm already anticipating how nice it will be to be next to you. He turned to Jane and added, And you, my girl, will have a great time with George. Maria will look after you while your mom and I have some fun. When the children got settled, we went to the restaurant. Jack kept his promise. The place he took me to was busy, but our table was in a secluded corner. The general hum of voices created a pleasant background, eliminating the possibility of eavesdropping on private conversations. The waiter brought 2 glasses of chilled Chardonnay, and Jack said, I took the liberty of ordering food and wine when booking a table. We'll start with a light seafood salad that pairs perfectly with this wine. This will be followed by pheasant fillet, accompanied by a light Italian red. Hope you like it. I'm sure it will be wonderful, I replied. It seems like a very cozy place. As you understand, just going out somewhere in the evening is already a holiday for me. The waiter brought the food, and we started eating. Jack was very tactful. He did not rush me to start the story. After a while, I myself began to say, For almost 2.5 years, I haven't had the opportunity to talk about what happened to me. Those who should have been there turned their backs on me, and my friends disappeared. I paused, and Jack remained silent, patiently waiting for me to continue. Most people would probably say that it's all my fault. Perhaps you will also decide that I behaved badly and deserved what happened. But Jack, if you think that way, please don't ruin Jane's opportunity to be friends with George because of me. I can't live with this. I looked at him pleadingly. Of course not, he replied. I don't think you could do something so terrible that it would affect the children. Carry on, I won't judge, I'll just listen. I looked at him and said, I like you, Jack, and I'm starting to think that you are a good and caring friend. I hope we will remain friends after I finish my story. I won't go into detail, just try to give you a general idea of what happened. I took a deep breath and continued. I was married to Frank. We had 2 children, a boy and a girl. Life was good and Frank was a great father and husband. But at some point, I felt that I wanted to expand my sexual horizons and took a lover. I thought, what he doesn't know doesn't hurt him. A very stupid idea. My lover was Levin, a work colleague. I brought him home at lunchtime. Sometimes this happens 2 or 3 times a week. I paused to take a sip of wine and collect my thoughts. I continued. I think Frank knew what was going on, but instead of making a scene or talking to me directly, he planned revenge. He arranged everything so that the divorce, which he obviously wanted, would go in his favor. Like I said, we had 2 children and I wanted one more. Frank was against it. He didn't want any more children. When I stopped taking the pill in hopes of getting pregnant, he started using condoms. We fought about this for months. I continued my relationship with Levin, but he also used condoms. I wanted Frank's baby, not Levin's. And then one day Frank came up to me and handed me condoms with the words that he was giving up and that I could have a baby. I fell silent, remembering the moment when I, naively thinking that he loved me, believed that he wanted to give me another child. I didn't think at all about my own double standards. Looking back, it was unforgivable. But the strangest thing, I continued, was that the months passed and I still couldn't get pregnant. It was strange because there were no problems with the first 2 children. When I expressed my concerns, Frank suggested that we not focus on conception, but turn our attempts into an adventure, a fun game. He suggested role-playing and fantasy. We started experimenting. I put on provocative clothes, we went to bars, where he pretended to be a stranger who was seducing me, and we returned home to make love. At some point, he suggested pretending to be someone else. Then everything happened. Frank blindfolded me and said that he had called a friend to help us conceive. It was just a role-playing element, I thought. He introduced himself as Don. I got pregnant and was happy. We stopped role-playing and started making love again almost every night until the last month of pregnancy. It was a good time, at least for me. But everything fell apart when Jane was born. I fell silent, trying to hold back my tears. Jack looked at me carefully, without interrupting. The child obviously wasn't Frank's, I continued. He should have known about my infidelity. He knew for sure that the child was colored. But then I didn't understand how. He filed for divorce, accusing me of adultery with Levine and an unknown black man. I presented the court with evidence of my meetings with Levin, audio recordings, and similar things. I fell silent, tears streaming down my cheeks. Nobody, not even my lawyer, believed me when I said it was a setup. Frank's evidence was so convincing, and my blindfolded story sounded too far-fetched. The court sided with him. I received practically nothing after the divorce. I lost custody of our children. Now I only have the right to visit. He does everything he can to make my life difficult, even though I know the kids miss me. After all, I was a good mother, and he knows it. Jack looked at me with sympathy, reached out his hands, and gently squeezed my palms. Something went wrong, and Levin still got you pregnant. No, I shook my head. Levin is also white. Jane is not his daughter. My husband actually brought someone to help, and I didn't even understand it. He did not say in court that I agreed to this. He denied both role play and blindfolding. I wiped my tears and continued. And you know, the most painful thing is what he told me later. One day, when I came to visit other children, he once again made sarcastic jokes and humiliated me. He said he had done a procedure, which I knew nothing about. He laughed at me, saying, "Well, how is your child?" He set it all up. A faint smile crossed my face as I looked at Jack. "You probably think that I'm a bad woman who deserves such a punishment." "No," Jack said firmly, "I don't approve of cheating. You really did wrong to your husband." But his revenge was too cruel. Not only did he punish you, but he dragged an innocent child and other people into this. It was undeserved. "Thank you for your support," I replied, grateful for his words. "The worst thing is that I can't tell my daughter who her father is and why." We spent the rest of the evening in silence. When Jack paid the bill and we left the restaurant, I thanked him for listening to me and said that it made me feel better to open up to someone. The next Saturday morning, Jack came back to the park with George, smiling as usual. While the children were playing, we talked about our dinner. Jack suggested meeting again one evening during the week, and so it went. Over the next months, we went to dinners, concerts, movies, or just walked, sometimes having a snack. I began to develop affection for Jack and value him as a dear friend and supportive companion. One Saturday morning, sitting on our bench and planning activities for the next week, I said, "We've been spending time together every week for quite some time now, Jack. I really enjoy your company, but more often than not, you take on the expenses for me. I would really like to change this. Can I cook you dinner at my apartment next week?" I looked at him with a question in my eyes. "Of course, you can. I'm already looking forward to visiting you," he replied. It was such a pleasure to cook for someone again. Over the years, it was just me and my little daughter at my table, and it seemed like it went on forever. Of course, I'm not a Gordon Ramsay-level cook, but I'm not entirely bad either. I cooked a delicious dinner and bought a bottle of good red wine. While I waited anxiously for Jack, I put Jane to bed and dressed to look stunning. I put on a short red skirt and a white silk blouse with the top 2 buttons undone. I didn't wear a bra. I did my best to look sexy. When Jack arrived and I saw his expression, I realized that my attempt was a success. Over dinner, we chatted about everyday life. While pouring him wine, I tried to let him look into my neckline, and while sitting, I showed off my legs. To be honest, I tried to seduce him. After dinner, sitting next to him with a cup of coffee, I looked into his eyes and said, "I've been alone for almost 4 years, and during this time I have not had intimacy with a man." I hesitated, lowered my gaze, and muttered, "It's difficult for me to say what I want to ask you, but please, can you stay? Do you have to go home tonight? I I won't demand anything, but can you stay?" I looked at him hopefully. Jack didn't say anything, just hugged me. After a while, he whispered in my ear, "Yes, I can stay, but I need to call Maria and tell her that I won't be there until the morning." He went to make a call. My heart was pounding in my chest. I was nervous as a teenager and walked from corner to corner, waiting for him to return. When he returned, I immediately threw myself into his arms and we kissed hungrily. It was the longest, most passionate kiss of my life, and when we had to break away from each other for air, I pulled him into the bedroom. We started undressing each other. I fiddled with his tie, buttons, and cufflinks. He picked me up, put me on the bed, and, looking into my eyes, asked, "Are you sure? Be gentle. I haven't done this for a long time," I whispered. Then Jack supported me, and life began to improve. We began to spend time together, and I felt happy. The only unresolved question remained: who was Jane's father? One day Jack asked, "Do you still want to know who your daughter's father is?" "Yes, I want to. Not only for his own sake, but also to give her a reasonable answer when she asks about it." "And she, no doubt, will ask," I answered. "I know that you won't allow me to pay for the services of a private detective to look into this matter. The outcome may be uncertain and the cost high, so with your likely limited funds, it would be a risky move." He paused, looked at me, and continued, but it seems I have a solution. Our law firm from time to time engages a small but good detective company. Today, its owner came up to me and asked if there was a job for him. He has little to do now and is free. I said there was nothing for him, but I thought about you and your problem. I gave him a general outline of your situation and asked if he would be willing to work on a no result, no pay basis in his spare time to try to find your daughter's father. If he succeeds and finds the father, you can pay him from the funds that the father will be required to pay you as child support, starting with Jane's birth. If he doesn't succeed, you won't have to pay anything. He said he would think about it. I suggest you contact him, Mandy, and reference our conversation. Do you think this is possible? I asked. I have a little savings, and even if my father can't pay anything, for example, if he's dead or a tramp or another person without funds, I'm still ready to try. Thank you. Don't rush to thank me. First talk to John Smith. Perhaps he will come up with ideas after he listens to your story in detail. He needs to know all the details. They may contain the keys to the solution. So I found myself a few days later in my living room telling John Smith the story I had already told Jack, but this time in great detail. When I finished, he started asking questions. Of course, he was most interested in the role-playing part because, as he said, that's when the other man was supposed to get involved in the story. This man would be black, and if we were lucky, his name might be Don or Donald, and he would have 5 children. He didn't believe my ex-husband could be so stupid or careless, but he added, "You can never be sure." "Dear madam, here is my proposal," he said. "I can work on your case on a no result, no payment basis in between other cases. I will give myself 3 months, so I ask you not to contact me or ask about the progress of the investigation until I contact you myself. Try to forget that I'm doing this and live your life as usual. The wait time will seem long if you are not distracted. If I am successful and find your daughter's father with evidence that is legally sound, my fee will be $5,000, payable in convenient installments. If I don't find my father or can't provide the necessary evidence, you don't owe me anything. Do you agree?" "Yes, I agree," I answered. "I don't need parts. I saved up money to buy a car, but I can do without it and pay right away if you succeed. I hope you succeed. This is much more important than the car." "Great, then we agreed. Before I start, I'll need your ex-husband's address, his place of work, the clubs he belongs to, a list of all his friends, not just black ones. I'd also like information about his interests, the bars and restaurants he frequents, and a photo of him if you have one. And finally, I need a swab from your daughter's mouth to create a DNA map of her, so that if necessary, I can compare with the samples found." After I provided all the necessary information and a DNA sample, his parting words were, "Forget about me and my work. I will contact you no later than 3 months." 4 weeks flew by quickly, and then time began to drag slower. Forgetting about the investigation turned out to be more difficult than I thought. Jack was a great support to me. If it weren't for him, I would probably be climbing the walls. I was terribly nervous waiting for the result. There were still 3 weeks left before the deadline Mr. Smith had given himself when he called and asked for a meeting. "Do you have any positive results?" I asked with excitement. "I'll give you my report when we meet, but I think you'll agree that you probably owe me $5,000, he replied. I started crying and laughing at the same time, and then muttered through my tears, "Please come right now, as soon as possible." "I expected you to be in a hurry," he answered with a smile. "I'm standing at your door and can come in 5 minutes." When I opened the door, a smiling John Smith stood on the threshold with a folder under his arm. I hugged him and dragged him into the living room. "I'll give you a summary. The details are in the report. You can read them at your leisure after I leave. If you have any questions, you can call me at any time," he began and continued. "We assumed that your ex-husband received help from a friend or someone he knew and trusted. If he had used the services of a random person picked up in a bar or somewhere else, he would have been taking a huge risk, exposing himself to the chance of being blackmailed. We researched his circle of friends, business associates, golf partners, etc., and came up with 3 possible candidates. 2 of them were unmarried, and the third was married and the father of 5 children, as mentioned in the role-playing game. Since the latter candidate was apparently prolific, we focused on it. Besides, his name was Donald. My daughter, who works with me, went to his children's school and caused a little incident with Donald's youngest child. She showed herself to be a caring adult, comforted the child, and of course, managed to obtain a sample that could be used to compile a DNA profile. The report states that there is a 99.98% chance that your daughter and Donald's youngest child are siblings. I looked at him and asked with a trembling voice, "Will this be strong evidence in court?" "I'm not finished yet," he replied. "When we got this result, we needed to provide evidence directly from Donald. To do this, I brought in one large man with whom I sometimes work. He looks menacing, but is actually a kind-hearted person. I asked him to start a fight with Donald at the bar, and my wife was ready. Everything went like clockwork. My man hit Donald, and my wife, indignant, shouted at him to leave Donald alone and kindly held out a clean handkerchief for him. The DNA was collected, tested, and we now know for sure that Donald is the father of your daughter." "So this can be presented in court?" I asked. "No, you can't. This evidence was obtained in a less than legal manner, but with a good lawyer, you can put pressure on him, threatening him with charges of non-consensual sex and conspiracy to destroy your reputation. With this kind of evidence, Donald will most likely give in and confess, and then you can deal with your ex-husband and negotiate a better agreement." He smiled and continued, "I will issue you an invoice only after Donald acknowledges his paternity or the court makes an appropriate decision. FYI, Donald is a good person. I think he will take responsibility for his role in this matter. In 2 weeks. On Saturday afternoon, the day I was supposed to pick up the older children, I stood in front of Frank's house with an envelope in my hand. I pressed the doorbell and waited. Frank opened the door, looked at me and the young man next to me and grinned. "Mandy, have you got yourself a driver?" "No, Frank," I said. "He's here as a witness." "You have been given documents." I handed him the envelope. "What do you mean, delivered?" "This morning your friend Donald spent 3 hours with my lawyer and me, and in the end he told everything. You are accused of conspiring to destroy my reputation, having sex with someone I don't know without my consent, and making false statements in court during our divorce proceedings. For this, I demand compensation for moral damage caused to me, loss of social reputation, and many other legal points that you can read in the documents. The amount of the claim is $5 million. Frank looked stunned. His mouth was open, but he could not utter a word. I looked at him and added, "I think you need some time alone to think it over. So I suggest that Len and Mary spend the weekend with me. Agree?" He nodded and said to the children who stood behind him, "Pack your things, go with your mom for the weekend." While the children were packing their bags, I told them, "This is between you and me. I won't say a word to Len and Mary. You are their father, and I want them to love you. I expect the same from you. But there will be a few changes. We will discuss an amicable agreement, but joint custody is my firm requirement. I advise you to contact your lawyer on Monday. If my lawyer doesn't hear from him within a week, the case will go to trial." Frank looked depressed. As I walked away with Len and Mary, I couldn't resist turning around to say, "By the way, Jane is growing up to be a beautiful girl. You should get to know her. Peter, Amy, Mandy, and John. If you are interested, I can tell the story of my life. But I will not retell it from the very beginning until today, but will only dwell on the key points. You have to understand, my life can be divided into 3 periods: the time before Amy, the period with Amy, and everything that happened after her. I think you've already guessed that the most important thing is the time with Amy and how it ended. Why and how this happened is a truly interesting story, so unusual that most people will consider it fiction. But this is the honest truth. Today, I am a happy grandfather, surrounded by loving people. What makes me especially happy is that I was always surrounded by good people, even in those times when it seemed that my life was falling apart. This may surprise many, but even the betrayal that happened in my life was not malicious, selfish, or selfish. Vice versa. To make it easier for you to understand the chronology of events, I will mention several historical facts. The Korean War ended in 1953, although it was technically just a ceasefire, and there is still no official peace. In 1988, terrorists planted a bomb on Pan Am Flight 701, resulting in a tragic crash in Lockerbie, Scotland. This was the beginning of the end for the airline, which went bankrupt in 1991. Another event, although not on a global scale, occurred in 1996. An aquarium opened at the Mall of America in Minneapolis. Now let's remember the fateful summer day about a year after the opening of the aquarium. At the time, I was running my own insurance agency, which, after many stressful years, had become quite profitable. I lived and still live in St. Paul, one of the Twin Cities. I had a meeting that morning and then found myself with a couple of hours of free time before my next task. I decided to take a walk around the Mall of America, which was almost next to the office where I went. I had never been to an aquarium before, so I went in, bought a ticket, and started exploring. The aquarium made a strong impression. Visitors could walk between huge tanks with exotic fish and marine life. Narrow corridors led past all the exhibits, and through the glass you could see people walking in the opposite direction. As I was looking at the big shark, I suddenly noticed a woman holding the hand of a little girl. I had to look twice to be sure. The woman smiled at the child, pointed to a bright fish in an aquarium that stood far from me, turned to the man next to them, laughed, and kissed him lightly on the lips. Stunned, I realized that it was my wife and our daughter. They looked like a happy family. The woman turned to me, and I'm sure she recognized me because she quickly whispered something to the man, and they hurried to the exit. The crowd was too thick, and I couldn't catch up with them. When I went outside, they were no longer there. This worried me. Did I really see my wife and daughter? They were so similar that it seemed impossible to make a mistake. But how could this be? It was my wife's work week, and she had to be away and not be back until Monday. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I didn't remember what I was doing until I finally got home. My 6-year-old daughter Maggie rushed to meet me, happy to see me. She hugged me tightly, and I picked her up, asking, "What did you do today, dear Maggie?" "Linda and I went to the pool." "Dad, I can already swim 10 breaststroke strokes," she answered excitedly. Linda, our Swedish nanny, smiled and confirmed. We spent the whole day in the park and then went to the pool. Maggie learns to swim and makes progress. Obviously, this was a mistake, a classic case of doppelganger. But how can one explain the coincidence of two doubles at once? Maggie and Linda couldn't lie so convincingly, it was simply impossible. The rest of the week flew by quickly. Amy returned on Monday around noon. I was in the office, so I didn't meet her at home. When I returned, the strange incident in the aquarium completely slipped my mind. As always, the first night of her return was full of love and tenderness. I met Amy when she was a flight attendant on a Pan Am flight. Like many other male passengers, I was captivated by this witty and cheerful Korean woman. I asked where she lived, and it turned out that this was my city. I asked for her phone number, saying that I really wanted to get to know her better. One thing led to another, and a year later we got married. She was adopted as an infant by an American Air Force captain and his wife after the Korean War. They brought her and a Korean nanny to America, where she grew up learning the Korean language and culture from her nanny. That's why she was bilingual. Pan Am took advantage of her language skills by sending her to Asian routes. Her work trips lasted several days, but she compensated with more time at home, which I really liked. After several years of marital bliss with this wonderful woman, Pan Am was rocked by the terrorist attack on Flight 701. She was home at the time, but her reaction was much stronger than I expected. Her good colleagues were on board, but her crying was almost hysterical. When I calmed her down, she explained that she was supposed to be on that flight, but had switched shifts with another flight attendant named Mandy. Her guilt was enormous, and she said she had to visit the victim's family to try to console them. She spent 2 days with them, returned more collected, and said that she would start flying again. Thinking about it now, I realized that this was a turning point in our lives. About 2 months after the crash of Flight 1, she returned home and announced that she had quit and would no longer fly. Before I could ask what she was going to do, she said, "I was offered a job and I accepted it." Without consulting me, I was surprised. "It was too good an offer to refuse," she replied and continued. "I was offered a job at a government agency that required my knowledge of the Korean language. I went through a security check and was told that I could not discuss my work with anyone. It's not dangerous work, you just can't talk about it. The salary is twice as much as what I earned as a flight attendant, and I have a lot of free time." She smiled and kissed me. "Well, Amy, where's the catch? Small Peter. I used to fly out for 5 to 7 days on an irregular basis. Now the work will be regular. I will share it with another person 50-50. I will work 1 week and rest the next. This means I leave on Monday morning and return the following Monday before noon. Then I'm home until next Monday. So I'll be home 26 weeks a year. This schedule has remained the same for almost 9 years, with a break for maternity leave when our daughter was born 6 years ago. She must be good at her job because she makes some serious money." That Saturday evening, we sat on the terrace, enjoying the late summer sun. She snuggled into my lap. We opened a bottle of good Californian red wine, and the atmosphere was cozy, relaxed, and very intimate. Then I told her about my visit to the aquarium and how I saw her and Maggie's double. She visibly tensed, and I felt her freeze in my arms. She tried to laugh it off, and it almost worked, but not quite. Then I realized that something was hidden from me, and I have to find out. I usually take Amy to the airport on Monday morning. On rare occasions, if I leave early or have an early meeting, she has to take a taxi. That morning I said I needed to leave early and she should call a taxi. I kissed her goodbye, wished her a good week, and left. But not to work. I went to the airport. There I parked my car in the garage, went to the Enterprise rental counter, and rented an inconspicuous car. Hiding behind a column, I watched as she approached the service entrance and went inside the building as usual. 20 minutes later, she came out with another bag, hailed a taxi, and left. I got into my rental car and followed them, hoping for the best. The taxi arrived in the wealthier area of Longwood. Amy paid, went up to a very beautiful house, the door opened, and Mandy's double appeared on the threshold, who rushed into Amy's arms. In the open door, I noticed a statuesque blonde laughing and greeting her. Presumably, it was the nanny. I was stunned. "Can she work here?" "No, that's impossible." I slowly walked back to the airport, returned my rental car, and drove my car to the office. I asked my secretary to clear my day and not transfer any calls except those from my wife. I then started looking for information about the residents at the address where Amy entered. I learned that the occupants were Mandy and John Stevenson. I soon remembered that fateful day in 1988 when Amy said she had switched flights with another flight attendant named Mandy. She went to console them and stayed there for 2 days. What the hell happened next? Is she living a double life? If so, where does the money come from? Does her husband, John, pay her to stay with him for a week at a time? There are too many questions, and the only way to get answers is to talk to her. I took a deep breath and called the Stevensons' home number. When the phone was picked up, I heard, most likely, the nanny. "The Stevenson residence. Can I talk to Mandy Stevenson?" "Who is asking her?" "Tell her it's Peter Wilson. She needs to talk to me." A few seconds later, she went to the phone and asked in an alarmed voice, "Peter, did something happen at home? Tell me Maggie is okay." "Yes, Amy, everything is fine with her. No emergency." "Then why are you calling? You shouldn't have opened the sealed envelope with that number on it, unless it was a serious matter that I needed to know about." "I didn't open the envelope, Amy. I found the number in a directory while looking up contact information for Mandy and John Stevenson." "Can you explain this?" There was a long pause, and then she said, "Peter, I'm so sorry. Yes, I can explain it, but not over the phone. Are you in the office now?" "Yes, I'm here." I can come, but first I have to call John and ask him to join. He doesn't know any more than you. I have to explain everything to both of you at once. Please. I cleared my schedule for today. What happened this morning when I was following you from the airport has left me so unsettled that I am unable to work. I'll be waiting. Her voice trembled, and it was clear that she could barely cope with herself. Before she passed out, I heard her crying. A little after noon, she came to my office with the same man I saw with her at the aquarium. She looked at me and said, "Peter, meet my husband, John Stevenson." She kissed him lightly on the cheek, walked over to me, kissed me on the cheek, turned to John and said, "John, meet Amy Wilson and her husband, Peter." Both John and I were speechless with surprise, but after a few seconds we asked almost simultaneously, "Are you a bigamist?" "No," she replied, "but I understand that I have to explain myself to both of you. It's a long and complicated story. Can we sit down at the negotiating table so I can tell you everything at once?" She continued, "Please know that I love you both and would like to continue to love you. I understand that this will be difficult, but please listen to me until the end and do not interrupt. It will be emotional and difficult for me." Peter looked at her and asked, "Please tell me who you are." "I'm Amy, Peter's wife, and I'm Mandy, John's wife. As I tell this story, take it for granted. In the end, I hope you don't ask this question again. Can I continue without interruption?" John and I looked at each other, shook our heads in agreement, and sat back in our chairs, crossing our arms, letting her know we were ready to listen. I'll have to start with the background. At the very end of the Korean War, a young Korean woman gave birth to two girls, identical twins. Her husband died at the front a few days before the armistice. She was poor and had no family to support her, so she was forced to give the girls up to a shelter for adoption. One of the girls was adopted by an Air Force captain and his wife, naming her Amy, and the second was adopted by an Army colonel and his wife, naming her Mandy. Neither family knew of the other's existence or that they had adopted one of the twins. Both girls were loved and cherished by their adoptive parents. Fate decreed that one of the families settled in St. Paul and the other in Minneapolis. Amy and Mandy lived their entire childhood and youth literally a few miles apart from each other, but never met. Both played sports, did well in school, and both families hired Korean nannies so the girls could learn their native language. After graduating from school, one went to a kibbutz in Israel for a year, the other went on an exchange with the Peace Corps in Africa. When they returned, both became Pan Am flight attendants. In the first years of work, one flew on domestic routes, the other on European routes. At this time, Amy met Peter, or rather, he showed interest in one of the flight attendants and asked for her phone number. They got married a year later, and Mandy met John in London. He was glad to learn that she was American. They also got married a year later. At this point in her story, she asked us if we needed to arrange coffee and buns. We both decided against the buns, but decided some coffee would be nice. While the secretary was organizing the drinks, she continued, "After some time, Pan Am transferred both of us to Asian routes because of our knowledge of the Korean language. Then we finally met. We realized that we were most likely identical twins after discovering that we were born on the same day and in the same place. We instantly became close and became best friends. Our first reaction was to involve you, but then we decided to get to know each other better first. Over the next months, we were together at every opportunity without interfering with work or interfering in your lives. We told each other our stories, shared family backgrounds, and talked about our husbands. In other words, we learned everything about each other. One day, Mandy called Amy and said that she felt bad, but she had a flight. Amy offered to replace her. We didn't report this to the company. We just switched identities, and Amy made the flight as Mandy. Nobody noticed anything. Then we began to change flights from time to time. After a few months, we began to wonder, can we fool our husbands? Of course, we had to check it out. We exchanged badges, purses, passports, credit cards, keys, and bags. Amy took a taxi to Mandy's house, and Mandy took a taxi to Amy's house. You two didn't notice anything, but it was unexpected for us. When we kissed each other's husbands, we both felt a powerful attraction. We fell in love almost instantly. Amy or Mandy looked at us and said, "We didn't expect this. I think you can guess what happened next." John asked, "You mean you've been sleeping with both of us all these years?" "Yes, one of us slept with both of you for about 2 years, and I slept for almost 11. She continued, "Perhaps now you, Peter, can better understand my pain on that terrible day in 1988 when Flight Zizan 1 crashed over Lockerbie. My sister and the wife of one of you died that day." Her voice trembled and her eyes filled with tears. "Also, Peter, except that on that day you didn't know for sure which of us was at home with you and which died in the disaster." Then my world collapsed. You tried to calm me down, but I was in such pain that I couldn't tell the truth. I told you that we switched flights and that I was supposed to be on that plane. I had to go to John to console him because he believed Mandy was on board. I spent 2 days with him and then told him that I needed to go back to work, but for a short domestic flight. Peter, you remember that I didn't take the domestic flight. I didn't fly anymore. I quit my job, and since then I only lived in 2 houses, remaining a loving wife for 2 husbands. It was incredibly difficult for me. Not loving both of you, no, that wasn't a problem. But losing my sister was painful. After a while, I had to see a therapist to deal with it. I couldn't pour out my soul to any of you, although I really wanted to. The therapist strongly advised me to tell both of you everything, but I didn't even tell him the whole truth. He didn't know who I really was, Amy or Mandy. At this point, she burst into tears. It was obvious that telling her secret was incredibly difficult for her. Her tears were a natural reaction after so many years of intense double life. After a while, John and I asked, "Are you finished? Can we ask questions? We have too many of them." "No, I haven't finished yet. There's still a lot to explain," she said. She wiped away her tears, took a deep breath, and continued. "Amy and Mandy bought a national lottery ticket together a few weeks before the terrible disaster. We won the main prize, a huge sum of money that was to be paid in installments over 30 years. We were going to invite you to dinner at a fancy restaurant to tell you everything about money and about us. Our families would be provided for life. But the Lockerbie tragedy happened before we could do it. I know that I should have told who died in the disaster and given half of the winnings to the widower so that he could start a new life. Moreover, there were no children then, but the problem is that I loved you both. Thanks to this money, I was able to quit my job and began transferring monthly payments to both accounts equally. I made up a story about a government job and started living with both of you. 1 week with Peter, another with John. John and I looked at each other, shaking our heads. "This is pure madness. How could you do this?" we said almost simultaneously. "I already told you," she answered. "I loved you both and could not part with either of you. It was terribly selfish, but I hoped to make you both happy. Weren't you happy with me?" "Yes, they were," we answered. "But you should have understood that your double life would be revealed sooner or later," I added. "I knew it," she said. "I was sure that everything would come up when I became pregnant. I didn't expect this to happen. I knew I couldn't hide the pregnancy from one of you, so I decided that fate had to play its part. I didn't know which one of you is the father. I just hoped that at least one of you would stay with me. Later, the doctor told me that I was expecting twins. Since I was a twin myself, the likelihood of this was high. Then I deceived you both again." John sighed heavily, shook his head, and said, "You are a treacherous woman. Looking back on what you did just over 6 years ago, I can almost guess how you deceived us." With a barely noticeable smile, she looked at both of us and continued, "The money that was transferred to your accounts was less than the amount that actually arrived. Thus, funds accumulated in the bank, which I used to negotiate with a private clinic about the birth and several weeks after it. I told them that I don't know which of you is the father, so I asked both of you to visit me in turn. The clinic accepted my explanation, although they couldn't understand why you both only see one of the twins. In the end, I had to tell the doctor part of the story to get his support. I didn't tell him everything, only what was necessary. To bring one girl to one house and the second to another, I had to come up with a story about a violation of the child's immune system. I said that we should stay in the clinic for a long period to strengthen the children's immunity. In fact, this was just an excuse so that the twins would have enough time to gain strength, and I would have the opportunity to establish the process. I asked you both to find a suitable nanny. Peter found her first, so I brought Margaret Chin home. I didn't have enough milk to feed both girls, so I supplemented my feedings with formula. Then I started going to Madeline Jew's clinic, waiting for John to find a nanny too. This period was the most exhausting of my life. I was completely exhausted. When everything got better and both nannies started working, I was able to return to my job, that is, to live between two houses. I named Margaret after Peter's mother and Madeline after John's mother. To avoid the risk of a slip of the tongue and accidentally mentioning the wrong name, I started calling them by their shortened names, Maggie and Maddie. Their names are so similar that if I misspoke, you probably wouldn't notice. They have different Korean names, Jin, which means jewel, and Ju, which means pearl. For me, they are jewels. I noticed that John was having a hard time taking it all in, just like I was. It was too incredible. She paused, wiping away the tears that were streaming down her cheeks. It should have been clear to her that her story was causing us a shock that we most likely would not be able to overcome. Seeing John and I looking at each other and shaking our heads, she reached across the table and grabbed our hands tightly, saying, "Peter, John, I love you both so much that it hurts me, as well as my girls. Can't we find a way to be together? Please?" John immediately responded, "No, it's impossible. Our life cannot remain the same. I need time to think about everything. There's too much here to digest in 1 hour." "And you, Peter?" she asked. "I still have too many unresolved questions," I answered. Her face darkened and tears appeared in her eyes again. Her story shocked us, and none of us yet knew how to move on. I continued, "Half the time my wife lives with her sister's husband. Or am I a widower who lives with his late wife's sister? Who died in the plane crash? What happened to her remains? Who received insurance and compensation? What about children and possible paternity? Do I want to know? Not sure. But my Maggie is my daughter, no matter who the donor is, I think. John, can you live without knowing the answers to these questions?" "No, Peter, I don't think I can. I need time to process all this and evaluate my options, if any. But there is one issue that we must discuss," he continued. "Girls, should they meet or not? At first glance, it seems that they cannot be separated. They must be sisters. Amy and Mandy were deprived of this experience. Mandy looked at us and said, 'I won't answer the first two questions yet. I was hoping that you would let me remain John's Mandy and Peter's Amy. Please.' Regarding the question about my sister's ashes and compensation, my sister's ashes are in an urn, and the insurance and compensation are in an offshore bank. The beneficiary is her true widower. The money is not touched. Regarding the question about Maggie, Peter said that he might not want to know who her father is, since he still considers her his daughter. I hope John feels the same way. Please do not do DNA tests. Consider both girls as your daughters, both of you." At these words, she burst into tears, dropping her head into her hands, lying half on the table. It was too hard for her. 11 years of double life, 2 houses, 2 families, and waiting for the day when the secret will be revealed. John and I hugged her, trying to reassure her that life was not over and we would try to find a solution. When she calmed down, I said, "Amy, to me you are Amy, at least for now. John and I need to talk privately. You should stay away from us for a while. You cannot return to any of your homes for now." I turned to John. "Do you agree?" "Yes, I agree," he replied. Then he asked my Amy, but his Mandy, "Do you have a friend with whom you could stay for a few days?" "No, I don't think so. I have many friends, but some know me as Amy, others as Mandy. Peter, and you only know from one side of my life. Sorry, it's all so complicated." After a pause, she added, I've been friends with one of the flight attendants since the days when I worked as a flight attendant. We've kept in touch all these years just like Amy. She married a doctor and lives in New Jersey. But I can stay in a hotel here so I can be nearby for conversations. No, said John, you shouldn't be alone. You need someone to whom you can tell the truth and ease your soul. Is this friend from New Jersey the right person? Yes, I think she will understand. She's a good person and won't judge me. Call her Amy, I said. I don't have her number. It's in my phone like Amy's, and the phone is at the airport. John and I will take you to the airport to pick up your phone. Then we'll wait for you to contact her. If she agrees to accept you, we'll buy a ticket and fly you to New Jersey. That's what we did. She contacted a friend. After a short conversation, I picked up the phone. Susan, this is Peter. You may be surprised by this call from Amy. She has some serious problems and needs a friend to talk to. It's urgent. Can you take it for a couple of days? It's urgent, right? She asked. Yes, I answered. Thank you. An hour later, Amy was already on the plane to New Jersey. John and I agreed to meet the next day to talk. We had a lot of issues to discuss, and we got to get to know each other better. There is no point in retelling our conversations in detail. They were long, intense, full of anger, despair, and memories of happy moments with Amy Mandy. But we decided something right away. The girls should meet. We decided that it would be best if they met without us present, so as not to confuse them. We told our governesses about the problem we were facing and agreed that they would take the girls to the park together. We hope they will become friends naturally and gradually learn the truth. A couple of days later, Susan called from New Jersey. Peter, Amy is very confused, and 3 days here are not enough. She told me everything and seems to live in the illusion that she can save both of you. Is this even possible, Peter? No, I don't think so. At least from my side, it is impossible. She should be happy if she manages to save at least one of us. But even this is not guaranteed. That's what I thought. We need to bring her back to reality. My husband examined her health, and everything is physically fine. But she needs therapy. In his practice, there is an elderly therapist, a kind of grandmother, who agreed to work with her every day for an hour for several days. I think she should stay with us at least until the end of next week. Do you agree? Certainly. This will give John and I some extra time to sort out our thoughts. Perhaps an extra week will help us cool down and approach the problem more pragmatically. We both love this woman, but it is difficult to accept the fact that the wife of one of us dated the other for 11 years. How to come to terms with this is a big question. Plus, one of us is a widower without even knowing it. This is a huge blow. Understand. Amy or Mandy, whoever she is, needs to understand this too before she goes home. But whatever you do, don't judge her too harshly. She did this out of love for both of you, not out of malice. Please remember this. I'll call John and tell him the same thing. I hope everything works out so that you can live with it. Thank you, Susan. It was nice talking to you. We received updates from Susan every 2 days. Maggie and Maddie met and started playing together. They became close surprisingly quickly. It was wonderful to see how easily they became best friends, as if they had never been apart. On a Friday afternoon, almost 2 weeks after the initial conversation, Susan called and said she would set up a conference call at 6 p.m. for her, John, and me. Once the connection was established, Susan began. Peter and John, I hope you're both listening. We both confirmed. Amy or Mandy wants to talk to both of you at the same time. I think she's ready to go home and face the consequences. Please understand that she is very fragile right now, so promise not to be too hard on her. She understands the situation and is sincerely sorry, believe me. So here it is. Peter and John, I love you both, came her quiet, restrained voice. I hoped that I could continue to love you both. But Susan talked me out of this idea. Please don't say anything now. I will ask this question again when I see you face to face. I don't expect anything, but I ask. Let me ask when we meet. After a short pause, she continued. I booked a flight to Minneapolis for tomorrow. I booked a room at one of the hotels near the airport. I won't say what flight I'm arriving on, and I don't want anyone to pick me up. I'll take a taxi to the hotel. We must meet on neutral territory. I have one big request. I miss my girls. I need to tell them the simplified version of my story. I am their mother, and I need to hug them and tell them I love them equally. Could Linda and Karen bring them to me tomorrow around noon? Of course, we both confirmed. Thank you. Give me an hour with them, and then I will meet you face to face, so you can tell me what to do next. We'll be there, and we won't get angry or shout. This makes no sense. The girls will be with you at noon. They miss you too. Have a safe flight home. On Saturday afternoon, we arrived at the hotel with the girls. While Linda and Karen took the girls to their mother, John and I spent time at the cafe near the lobby. About an hour later, two small whirlwinds ran up to us, shouting excitedly. We have one mother. They were delighted and wanted to tell us everything. Later, dear Maggie and Maddie, now it's our turn to meet your mother and talk to her, we told them. I gave Linda $50 and asked her and Karen to take the girls to a cafe for ice cream or something and come back an hour later. Then John and I took the elevator up to her room. When we entered the room, we were greeted by a very reserved but collected woman. We hugged her, but the kiss seemed inappropriate in this situation. It was so nice to see the girls again. I really missed them the last 2 weeks, she said, and I missed you too. Please sit down, let's talk. As I said on the phone, I want to ask again. Is there even the slightest chance that we can continue to live as we have lived since 1988? John and I looked at each other and said, sorry, but no. Then I continued. I thought about this for a long time. I am not religious, but I think that the words from the Bible that no one can serve two masters, Matt 6:24 is very appropriate here. As long as we didn't know, no one suffered. But now that we both know, it's impossible. John and I have discussed this over and over again, but our answer is a resounding no. John nodded, confirming my words. What should we do? I love you both. Will you both give up on me? Not really, but we need to understand who you really are. We must find out which of us is a widower. The question is whether we will believe you when you tell us. We discussed this and must admit that we cannot say for sure after all these years. If this question had arisen in 1988, perhaps we could have. But now we are not sure. I understand your problem, but I can prove my identity. How? In your house, John, there is a box with all of Mandy's documents, certificates, school records, etc. There is a birth certificate and adoption papers in Korean with a certified English translation. In your house, Peter, there is a similar box with Amy's documents. Adoption documents contain a line that says, special features. Amy says, no. Mandy has a small, crescent-shaped birthmark on her neck. Having said this, she stood up, knelt down, bowed her head, and brushed her hair from her neck. And there, on the back of the head, there was a small but clear birthmark in the shape of a crescent. Then she began to shake and cry. John walked up to her and hugged her, trying to calm her down. I remained for a moment an observer of their grief and said, I'll leave you for a while, and went out to the bathroom, where he stayed for some time. John and I were mentally prepared for such a turn, but frankly, it is impossible to be completely prepared for this. I now knew that I had been a widower for the last 9 years and could now begin the grieving process. To be honest, a few years did fall as I sat in the bathroom, waiting for them to gather their strength for the next important question, the answer to which I, however, already knew. Who is the father of the twins? I walked back into the living room with Mandy and John. Before I go to give you more time, we need to settle the paternity issue once and for all. I sent Maggie's DNA swabs and mine to the lab. John, I think it is right that you, as Mandy's husband, are the biological father of the twins. But I'm still Maggie's father. Hearing this, John turned pale and said, I did the same, Peter. But Maddie and I are not related. There was dead silence. We both looked at Mandy like she was a ghost. Mandy almost collapsed in her chair, then tried to gather her strength, straightened up, looked at us, and said, That was my biggest fear. I knew it was possible, but I hoped that at least one of you would turn out to be the biological father. Please understand that I had neither the time nor the energy for novels. You two were more than enough for me. She was silent for a moment, then continued. This happened 7 years ago. My therapist said over and over again that I should tell you everything. I was in a terrible state. I stopped at the hotel to freshen up and be ready to talk. I was relaxing in the lobby when Mike, my college boyfriend, saw me. He noticed that I was upset and decided to cheer me up by offering to talk about old times. He invited me to lunch. We had a nice time, drank a bottle of wine, and I ended up in his room. I cheated on you that day, I admit it. But I have no regrets because, as you have now informed me, he was the biological father of Maggie and Maddie. Mike was married and had 3 children. He lived in Fargo with his family and a very beautiful wife. Since then, I have never seen or spoken to him. After meeting him, I returned to Peter and spent the whole weekend making love with him. On Monday, I went to John and stayed with him until I began to feel physical discomfort. The reason I wasn't shocked is because both Amy and I had no protection after we got married. We knew you both had fertility problems and your chances of getting pregnant were slim. We didn't tell you anything and left everything to chance. I was silent for a few seconds and then said, I have nothing more to say. Mandy, I don't want to hurt you. I'm ready to help you in the future, and I want to be a father to Maggie and Maddie if that's what you want. But I can't be your husband if John decides to get a divorce. I need to grieve the loss of Amy and build a new life. But I won't leave you, Mandy. Thank you, Peter, she said, hugging me. I love you, and I want to be a part of your life to the extent that you allow me to. John cleared his throat and said, The same goes for me, Mandy. I won't leave you. I need to think about our situation before I make a decision. I might ask for a divorce. I hope you understand that. The situation is too unusual. My suggestion, you stay in this hotel for a week. You will have access to your daughters as much as you want, but they will spend the night at home. Does this suit you? Yes. Look for a house, but don't sign any documents until we talk again, okay? Fine. Can you cope alone for a few days? Yes. Are you sure? Yes. We love you, Mandy. Do you understand that? Yes. It's time for us to go. Are you okay with this? No, but I understand. Mandy and John began attending couples therapy. A few weeks later, they went to a special couples camp where they received intensive counseling. They began to live together again. We all agreed that the girls would live with Mandy and John, and I could take them every other weekend and at least one holiday a year. Linda lived with them for a while until things settled down, and then returned to Sweden to begin her medical studies. Karen, who was 10 years older than Linda, during her work in the Stevenson house, managed to enter the University of Minnesota and almost completed her law degree. She had 1 year left when all this happened. I offered her to stay at my house for free on the condition that she would help with the girls every other weekend and do housework. She agreed enthusiastically. It gave her more time to study. For me, the next year became a period of mourning. My main joys were weekends with the girls. Karen and I enjoyed our time with them, and the girls, in turn, loved being with us. Mandy and John put their free weekend to good use by strengthening their relationship as a couple. John and I became very good friends. He admitted that the fact that neither of us turned out to be the girls' biological fathers helped him accept the situation and continue his life with Mandy. My contact with Mandy was limited to her bringing girls to me and taking them back. One day, almost a year later, after Karen had passed her final exams and found a job at an all-female law firm, Mandy asked to talk to me. Peter, she began, you need to pull yourself together and start living again. Yes, I know. I will have to come to terms with the fact that I will be all alone in this house. Karen has received her diploma, and I should expect that she will soon find an apartment, start an independent life, find a partner, get married, and have children. I don't look forward to this with joy. Yes, she will leave if you don't do anything. But I notice the way she looks at you. She doesn't want to leave. She loves you. But if you don't do anything, she will still leave. I'm too old for her, Mandy. I'm 15 years older. She can find someone better, closer to her age. It's up to her to decide. But I see that you both care about each other. Take the first step, Peter. I'm afraid of scaring her and ruining our friendly relationship. But I'll try to let her know how I feel and see what happens. Great, do it. But do it quickly before it's too late. I asked Karen to take the girls back to Mandy and John that Sunday night to think about how to approach her. When she returned, we were sitting in the living room. I said, Karen, I understand that after successful exams and a new job, you may want to find yourself an apartment. But before you do, I want to say that I really like it when you live here. I think we get along great, and I hope I can convince you to stay. With these words, I got up from the chair and went to the large panoramic window to give her time to think. She also got up, came up to me, and said very calmly, I might like it, Peter, but I have one condition. Which, before I call him, I need you to do one thing for me. She turned to me, kiss me, please. I kissed her, and it was an amazing kiss. We hugged each other. The kiss lasted a long time, and I felt like I was in heaven. When we pulled away to catch our breath, she asked, Do you want to hear my condition now? Yes, please. Your bedroom has a big bed, but you only use one half of it. For me to stay, you must invite me to occupy the other half of this bed. Do you agree? Of course, Karen. But am I too old for you? No, you are not old. I think I love you, Peter. I've been loving you for a while now. You don't have to promise me anything. I am a modern woman and would like to try living with you to understand how I feel. Can we do this, Peter? Not even a minute passed before we found ourselves in my bedroom and soon began testing our compatibility. Before going to bed, Karen kissed me again, smiled, and said, Mandy was right. You just needed a little push. A year later, after one of our love sessions, I asked Karen if she wanted children. Yes, I want to. And you? She asked. Yes, but I have a problem. My chances are low. This is no longer a problem. We will go to the clinic. Perhaps we will have one, or maybe 2 children. Okay, let's do this. But first I want to do something else. My dear Karen, will you marry me? Yes, we had a small wedding. John was my best man, and Karen asked Linda to be her maid of honor. Maggie and Maddie were adorable little bridesmaids. We bought Linda a first-class ticket because, as a student, she couldn't afford to travel that distance for just a few days. But we really wanted her to be part of our holiday because she supported us when everything was so difficult. Now, 16 years later, we look back and see a wonderful family. We had twins, of course, a boy and a girl who are now 15 years old. Maggie and Maddie completed their studies, married good men, and each had 1 child. Mandy realized that I needed someone to deal with my grief. She pushed Karen and I towards each other, and for that I will be forever grateful. Karen and Amy Mandy are as different as can be, so I can confidently say that I love Karen as much as I loved Amy, without comparing them. It was fate and terrorists who took Amy from me. But Karen filled the void in my heart, and together we lived a very happy life. Jane. My last bottle of Grand Vin Chateau Latour was almost empty. I held the glass in my hand, admiring the rich red color of the wine as the room filled with the subtle aroma of ripe berries and a slight oak bitterness. I thought about how much better it would be to drown my troubles in fine wine than in cheap bourbon, and for a moment the cold reality stopped pressing on my chest. Will my misfortune ever end? I thought, peering into the dark, deep ruby color of the wine. Yesterday, I was driving at high speed on the highway when suddenly the oil pressure dropped. At first, I didn't think anything of it, but the next minute the engine stopped talking and the car stopped on the side of the road. Now my engine was hopelessly broken and there was no point in repairing it. This morning, I broke my front tooth in a freak accident while I was hastily trying to open a package of tools. Now I had to go to the dentist and get an expensive crown. All this happened at a time when I found myself at the very bottom, as broke as possible. My company went bankrupt last week after my largest client failed. I lost all the assets that I invested in the project, hoping for success. Even the apartment in which I lived no longer belonged to me. The bank was going to take it away in the near future. I've lost everything. I tried to concentrate on the soft taste of the wine. I slowly rolled it across my palate, feeling a complex bouquet, rich in hints of cherry, prunes, and light sourness. I wanted this moment to last forever, but my thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a shrill doorbell. A loud, sharp sound rang through the silence of the room, as if to remind me that reality is never far away. What else? I thought gloomily, finishing the last sip of wine and reluctantly heading towards the door. When I opened it, I was stunned. What a surprise! I burst out when I saw who was standing on the threshold. On the threshold was Jane, my ex-wife, whom we had not seen for 12 years. I was struck by her appearance. Her eyes looked tired, but were still full of determination. She was holding the hand of a man whom I recognized, but at that moment I could not immediately remember the name. "May I ask what brings you here?" I asked, trying to hide my displeasure. "Can we come in?" she asked, and her voice sounded almost pleading. "We need to talk to you, George. We need your help." I reluctantly let them in, gesturing towards the living room. We sat down, and I looked around the room. Empty shelves, half-closed curtains, dark corners. It had once been a cozy place, but now it seemed as lost and empty as I felt. "Sorry," I said. "As you can see, the bottle is almost empty. This was the last one. I can only offer you a cup of coffee. We don't need anything. Just a chance to talk to you and ask you something," she replied, her voice shaking. "Okay, what's on your mind?" I asked, feeling the tension in the air. Jane took a deep breath, her gaze falling to the floor as if she was gathering her thoughts before saying something important. "I'll have to go back more than 12 years to the time I met Robert," she began. "As you know, we fell in love. He wanted me to leave you and marry him, and I agreed. I told him that I really wanted a child and promised that I would ask you for a divorce so that we could immediately begin the baby project. Then he told me something shocking. He could not, for medical reasons, be a father. He had a genetic defect that he did not want to pass on to future generations. He always used condoms when we made love. Do you see where I'm going with this, George?" My heart sank. I felt something heavy sink into my stomach. I frowned, trying to comprehend what I had heard. "Oh God, I think I understand. Are you saying that I am the father of your child?" I asked, feeling cold anger enveloping me. Jane nodded, her eyes full of despair. "Yes," she confirmed quietly. "So you really deceived me, right?" My voice was sharp, and I saw Jane flinch. "Yes, I deceived you. I lied to you. I asked Robert, what if I get pregnant with your child and tell you it's his child? Will he agree to take responsibility for the child and raise him as his own? He said yes and was happy because he really wanted to become a father." I grinned, believing that now she had come for alimony. Money again. There is only money everywhere, and now even here. Have you come to ask for help with child support? If so, then it's pointless. "My company went bankrupt. I'm losing my apartment. I have nothing left," I answered coldly. "No, not for that. If you help us, maybe we can help you," she said, and a new, barely noticeable hope was heard in her voice. "I don't accept handouts," I replied. "What is your problem?" Jane paused before saying quietly, "It's about our daughter. She has leukemia and needs a bone marrow transplant. I am not a suitable donor, and we really hope that you will agree to be tested. If you turn out to be suitable, will you help her? We haven't found any other donors, and it's a matter of life and death. We are desperate." Her eyes pleaded, her lips trembled. I was angry, of course I was furious. They used me. But could I refuse the child? I hated them both, but I couldn't hate an innocent child, especially if she was my daughter. After a pause, I replied, "You used me shamelessly, don't you agree?" Jane nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "Yes, I agree. I'm sorry. But Gina has nothing to do with it." "It's only my fault," she replied. I looked at her, then at Robert, who sat with a pale face and did not know what to do with himself. After a long silence, I said, "Agree. I can't refuse, but it will be on my terms. Whatever, George. I will do everything in my power if you save her. You know, her name is Georgina. We call her Gina. It was Robert's idea to name her after you. We were ashamed of how we deceived you. If she gets better, do you want her to live with you? I thought for a second and shook my head. No, it would be wrong to take her away from home. But she needs to be told the truth, and I want the right to visit her. In addition, you must pay all medical expenses, hers and mine. Like I said, I don't have any money right now. I added, also, I don't have a car, so you'll have to pick me up and take me to the hospital for an examination. They agreed, their faces full of hope. 2 days later, we were sitting in the doctor's office at the hospital. I felt cold sweat on my palms as I waited for the test result. The doctor finally came in and sat down at the table, a hint of concern flashing across his face. He cleared his throat and began. I don't even know how to tell you the result. Mr. Robson, what made you think you were the father of this child? I blinked at the unexpected question and then answered. My ex-wife told me about this 2 days ago. Jane turned to the doctor, her eyes full of despair. George must be the father. I got pregnant from him before I left. I told him I was pregnant with Robert's child so he could give me a quick divorce. Robert cannot be the father. We checked this and received confirmation. George is the only option. The doctor shook his head, and it seemed to me that he felt almost as much tension as we did. Excuse me, madam, but there is no doubt. Mr. George Robson is not the father of this child, and he cannot be used as a bone marrow donor. There was deathly silence. I saw Jane's face turn white, her lips trembling in shock. Robert seemed lost, looking from me to Jane, not knowing what to say. Suddenly Jane screamed, as if suddenly seeing the light. That bastard Tim, he said he couldn't have children. Who is Tim? Robert asked, his voice full of bewilderment. I looked at them both and chuckled slightly. I think she means our former neighbor, I said. Tim was a womanizer, and, as it turned out, he had affairs with every second woman in the area. By the way, he died last year. Apparently, he was not as pure as he claimed. Jane covered her face with her hands, and her shoulders shook with silent crying. Robert sat there petrified, his face gray with shock. And I just sat there, looking at both of them, and felt like some unbearable weight was finally starting to let go of me. Life, as it turned out, loved to mock everyone, without exception. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.